This year, 2022, is the 50th since people walked on the lunar surface.
So it's the perfect time to celebrate the Apollo moon program and look to the future as NASA plans to put people on the moon again in just 2 years' time.
Welcome to the Sky at Night.
We're here in the Science Museum's Space Exploration Gallery, where the story of the historic Apollo moon landings takes centre stage.
In this programme, we'll be exploring the Artemis programme and NASA's planned return to the moon.
Today, we are creating a new world. We can mine water ice from the poles of the moon. We can use that for life support. We can use that to make rocket fuel.
We'll discover that while the moon may have a role to play in future space travel, it's also a scientific treasure trove.
We've learnt so much from the Apollo missions about the formation of the moon, but the Apollo missions only sampled a very tiny part of the lunar surface.
And we'll be looking at how moon exploration is no longer the exclusive domain of government agencies.
This CubeSat is the size of a cereal box, really. And we just have this one instrument and one science goal, and that's to fly this neutron detector as low as possible over the south pole of the moon.
Before we get too deep into future moon missions, let's take a moment to remember the past. The BBC covered all aspects of the Apollo programme, from initial concept to final mission. So let's relive those heady days of the original moonshot.
I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal, before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth.
Well, I think that's a bit optimistic, and 1972 or 1973 is a more conservative estimate.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
Quite honestly, I tend to be a bit wary about this, and I shall be a bit surprised if it happens before 1980 or so.
9. Ignition sequence start.
Though I may be completely wrong.
Okay. 75 feet. Car's looking good. Down a half. 6 forward. 60 seconds. 4 forward. Drift into the right a little. 30 seconds. Forward. Drift. Contact light. Okay, engine stop. Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
There's a tremendous amount to be said, particularly in this year, 1969, the year when men first knew that they could go to other worlds.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
So, Doug, we just heard Patrick being a little sceptical there about when the moon landings were happening. Do you think that was sort of correct? Do you think they were quicker than we anticipated?
Well, I suspect he was rightly sceptical because it was a huge undertaking. When Yuri Gagarin, the first human, went into space, the US had 15 minutes of experience of humans in space. So they were really starting from scratch, and I suspect Patrick Moore was just thinking, well, it's such a tall order. Can they really do it?
Yes. So it must be very proud to have this actually here in the Science Museum.
It's the real thing. This is a real spaceship.
So it's been out there?
It's been around the moon. We're extremely fortunate. This has been with the museum since 1976. It's loaned to us from the Smithsonian's National Air and Space Museum. and it remains one of the most popular objects in the museum, in the entire museum.
Yes.
The mission was the dress rehearsal for the landing, and everything happened so quickly. So this was launched around the moon in May 1969, and then just 2 months later, Armstrong and Aldrin walked on the moon, Apollo 11. So what this mission was doing was basically testing all the vital systems at the moon for the first time, apart from landing. The lunar module, the lander, separated from the command module and went down to about 8 miles altitude above the lunar surface.
But do you think they were tempted? If I was there, 8 miles above the moon, go on, let's just do it.
Well, apparently that possibility occurred to those planning the mission, so there wasn't enough propellant, oxidant, fuel on board for them to have been able to take off.
Okay, yes.
So actually they were not allowed to land.
And I suppose that was the sort of the pathfinder to lead to the moon landings.
Yes, it showed it could be done. Everything was set for an attempt on a landing mission 2 months later.
So what's it like inside? Because I think this is part of what's inside that module.
Yes, so this is the main console from a simulator. So if you read what the astronauts, their experiences on the moon, they'll all talk about, oh, it's just like the simulator. In fact, this might be quite familiar to a lot of your viewers, because if you think about the Apollo 13 movie, which was really very good, it was very accurate, some of the elements were quite dramatic, but as regards what happened on the mission, it was very accurate indeed. And there's that pivotal moment where the switch was flicked. And then there was this bang, which all of the training hadn't prepared them for.
Yes.
And we can actually see the switches the Bacon character would have flicked, as I think Rusty Schweikart did on the mission.
Yes.
And what then happened when all the electricity started to fall away, they hadn't actually trained for that either. So this particular command module came back from the moon faster than any of the others. So if you look around the other side of the spacecraft and underneath, you can see where the heat shield was punished. It burned. It was designed to burn. That helps slow
with the
it
friction,
down.
yes.
With the friction, yes. So it was an extremely bumpy ride, as it always is if you're coming back from space. I suppose any museum tends to highlight the successes in life, but tends to miss out on certainly some of the failures, but also the trials and the testing and the
intermediate stages.
The intermediate stages. And this didn't land on the moon, but without this, Armstrong and Aldrin wouldn't have walked on the moon. So it's a crucial part of history.
Yes.
One of the events that some people say the 20th century will be remembered for.
That's all right, I don't mind a bit.
Almost as soon as the Eagle actually landed, attention turned to the future. A future of permanent bases on the moon. It was something that Patrick Moore discussed with Neil Armstrong in 1970.
Oh, it's beautiful, Mike, it really is.
One more thing I'd like to ask you. Do you think, from your knowledge of the moon, having been there, that it is going to be possible in the foreseeable future to set up scientific bases there on anything like a large scale?
Oh, I'm quite certain that we'll have such bases in our lifetime. Somewhat like the Antarctic stations and similar scientific outposts, continually manned. Although certainly there's the problem of the environment, the vacuum, and the high and low temperatures of day and night, still in all, in many ways, it's more hospitable than Antarctica might be.
Well, that hasn't yet come to pass, but NASA are working on it as part of their Artemis project. I spoke with Dana Hurley from NASA's Lunar Surface Innovation Initiative. She's responsible for driving forward the new technologies needed to make that dream a reality. Well, Dana, thank you for joining us. Let's start with the straightforward question. What is the Artemis program and how is it different from the Apollo era? It feels like we know how to go to the moon. That's been done. So what are the challenges today?
Well, today we are creating a new world instead of just trying to land Neil Armstrong on the moon. And in order to do that, we know that we need to get commercial industry involved. We need to have all of the academics working to develop technology. And so the big challenge that we're facing to do this is to have all that technology ready to have sustainable operations on the surface of the moon.
What are the technologies that you think are most important?
So we want to be able to use the regolith on the moon, that's the ground up rocks, basically the dirt on the moon. If we can use that as construction material, that will really reduce the amount of stuff that we need to take with us. If we can mine water ice from the poles of the moon, we can use that for life support. We can use that to make rocket fuel for return trips or to go elsewhere in the solar system, on to Mars, for example.
So tell me about the problems of dealing with, I don't know, day and night on the lunar surface. Even something as simple as that causes challenges.
That's right. So on the moon, you have 14 days of day and 14 days of night. And so that's going to cause a problem if you're using solar power. You only have the sun for 14 days, and then for 14 days in the night, you either need to go off of batteries or some other source of power. Then there's also the effect that there's a big temperature difference between the day side of the moon and the night side of the moon. The day side of the moon is almost 400 Kelvin temperature, but on the night side, it's below 100 Kelvin. So those thermal extremes are very stressing to equipment.
In general, how alien an environment is the moon when we think about technology there? Are we adapting things that work on Earth and finding new ways to use them, or do we have to start from scratch when we're thinking about how to work in the lunar environment?
So the best possible solution could be to marry the space experts with the terrestrial experts and get the best technologies developed quickly.
Apollo was delivered with the help of many private companies, but it feels like you're describing a slightly different approach here.
What we're trying to do this time is to get the infrastructure going there so that there will be other customers, not just NASA and not just the rest of the world space agencies, but for there to be a commercial industry on the moon that the commercial companies support and will become customers as well.
So what sort of industries are we talking about? I can imagine a thriving hotel industry as well. What are there other things we should consider?
So, obviously tourism would be awesome, and I would love to go myself. We would love it if there were some power provider that, we buy the power from in order to support that, and somebody who provides the habitats and that sort of thing. So, that is the goal, is to be, something that that NASA would be part of the consumer base.
What's our current best guess or hopeful guess for timescales? When do you think we will see some sort of base established?
I think that we're looking at the last part of this decade to have some parts of the infrastructure tested out and ready to be implemented. It is incredibly ambitious. And I think that's why NASA wanted to start this consortium, to make sure that everybody who could contribute got invested and got involved so that we could meet an ambitious schedule.
Excellent. Well, look, it sounds like you're having fun while solving this problem. And let's schedule. I'll come and catch up with you somewhere on the moon in 8 years' time or so, and we'll have another chat. Dana, thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Chris. I look forward to that.
A great example of NASA's new collaborative approach to space exploration is the CubeSat Pathfinder initiative. They've commissioned 13 tiny satellites to check out the moon before the astronauts land in 2024. Spare space in the first Artemis demonstration flight will be used to launch CubeSats into orbit around the moon, with the Japanese Space Agency satellite attempting a landing. The shoebox-sized spacecraft will gather crucial information about the lunar environment, everything from radiation levels to the presence of water, at a fraction of the cost of a conventional satellite. One of them is the brainchild of Craig Hardgrave and his team at Arizona State University.
So, Craig, it's lovely to speak to you. But it just seemed very surprising talking about a CubeSat going around the moon. And also, you're fairly early on in your career, and yet you're managing this whole space mission. I've managed a few, but it took a lot longer. How did you achieve this?
Well, I was very naive. So I think NASA has an idea for a new type of mission that, this CubeSat is the size of a cereal box, really. And we're using new technologies that will orbit the moon and take a really high-risk, high-reward data set. And the idea is to enable these types of new missions on future missions to explore all sorts of places in the solar system, but also to enable early career researchers to get experience on missions like these.
Craig's CubeSat is looking for evidence of water. It does this by using a neutron detector, which infers the presence of hydrogen. The ultimate goal is to produce an accurate map of water on the moon. It's an ambitious aspiration for such an unassuming spacecraft.
We just have this one instrument and one science goal, and that's to fly this neutron detector as low as possible over the south pole of the moon. And so we can get as close as about 8 to 12 kilometers over the south pole of the moon. We have enough knowledge from previous missions that we're comfortable getting extremely low, and that altitude will enable us to make maps that are at the scale of the permanently shadowed regions, these regions where we think water ice is trapped at the south pole of the moon. Where it's extremely cold, some of the coldest regions in the entire solar system, where ice is stable at the south pole of the moon.
So this does sound very groundbreaking. It's sort of deploying sort of many new sort of technologies, which we'll hopefully use in the future. But what's your future? You've done this mission, you've sort of delivered a spacecraft to NASA. What comes next?
I'd like a nap, a little break.
That sounds well deserved. And we are looking forward to joining you again when the mission actually gets to the moon and starts getting data, because that will be a very exciting time. So thank you so much for speaking to us today.
Thanks for having me.
So far in this program, we've looked at the moon as a destination. But of course, if you can't travel there yourself, it's one of the easiest and most rewarding objects to view in the night sky, as Pete Lawrence will tell you.
When the moon is visible, it's a great object for beginners and experts alike. And that's because it's big, bright, easy to find, and it has sharp edges which are easy to focus on. There are two types of feature which are visible on the moon's disk. The first is known as an albedo feature, and that's visible because of the way it reflects light. So, for example, the lunar seeds, which aren't particularly reflective, appear dark, whereas the more reflective lunar highlands appear bright. The other features are known as relief features, and these are visible because they actually have height. They have height and depth. Now, the best time to look for relief features is when the lunar terminator is nearby, and the terminator is the name given to the line that divides lunar day from night. And I can demonstrate that with a 3D printed section of the moon I prepared earlier. Okay, so I've got a piece of the lunar surface here. I hope you can see that okay. And my torch is representing the sun. Now, at full moon, the sunlight is directly onto the surface, so features are really difficult to see. But when the terminator is nearby, the sun is low in the sky for these features. So if I simulate that, you can see that this region of the moon suddenly becomes extremely detailed because of the shadows that are cast and the way the features also pick up the sunlight. The other great thing about the moon is that because it's so bright, if you're into photography, then it's quite easy to photograph. In fact, it's so bright that you can get a good shot of it using nothing more than a smartphone camera and a telescope. So I'm going to have a go here. So we can place the camera just over the eyepiece of the telescope like this, and there's the moon there. It takes a little while just to get it lined up, but when you do, the results can be pretty impressive. Now, the moon behind me there is full at the time I'm filming this. And when you get a full moon, it's on the opposite side of the Earth to the sun. But when you get a perfect alignment, and that's called a syzygy, by the way, the moon will move in to the Earth's shadow and you'll get an eclipse of the moon. And that's going to happen early morning on the 16th of May. Now, the eclipse begins at 02:32 BST, when the moon moves into the weak outer shadow, or outer part of the Earth's shadow, called the penumbral shadow. Now, that's really difficult to see. And over the next hour or so, that will appear as a shading on the western or left-hand side of the moon. It'll get more and more intense until at 03:37 the moon will encounter the main dark bit of the Earth's shadow. That's called the umbral shadow. And that will start then to creep across the moon's disk, making it look as if a bite has been taken out of the moon. That continues to creep across until at 04:29 BST, the entire moon will be engulfed in the umbral shadow. Now, you might think that the umbral shadow is completely dark, but it's not, because the Earth has an atmosphere, and that atmosphere refracts sunlight to infill the shadow. And because the atmosphere is really good at scattering blue light, the colour which is left behind tends to be at the redder part of the spectrum, so the moon starts to go a reddish colour. Now, the difficulty with this particular lunar eclipse, there's always one, isn't there, will be the fact that the point of greatest eclipse occurs at 05:11 BST, and that's 1 minute before the moon sets from the centre of the UK. So you should be able to see the first half of totality, but as the sky will be getting brighter when the moon is completely in the Earth's shadow because of the dawn twilight, it may disappear completely from view. It depends how dark the moon actually goes, so that's something to look out for. If you've got clear skies on May the 16th, do go out and witness this amazing natural phenomenon.
Whether your engagement with the moon is simply to marvel or to work out how to exploit it for space domination, there's more to the moon than meets the eye.
Chris popped next door to the Natural History Museum to discover why the moon's very existence is inextricably bound up with our own.
So I've got a couple of bits of moon rock on display that
Excellent.
I can show you. So this is called the Goodwill moon rock, and it was actually a gift to the UK from the American people at the end of the Apollo program.
And they've sent us a flag as well, which is nice.
Yes, the flag went to the moon and back as well. Union Jack has visited the moon.
Here we are.
Yes.
The magical portholes of Earth Hall.
Yes, and the other sample I wanted to show you is one of the portholes here.
There we go.
So this is a piece of moon rock that was brought back by the Apollo 16 mission in 1972, and that mission went to the highlands of the moon, so that's the pale coloured
Yeah, you can see it's really bright, isn't it?
Really bright white. Yeah, I love this sample. It's because it's so perfectly white and pristine.
But these are not the only pieces of moon that the museum has in its possession. In the laboratories, away from public view, are some lunar fragments which arrived here in a very different way. Excellent.
So these are pieces of moon, all little bits of moon, but they didn't come back from Apollo or any of the other space missions. They actually fell to Earth naturally as meteorites. So they probably formed when a big asteroid hit the moon, chipped a bit off, which then fell down to Earth.
So can we have a look at them?
Yeah, sure.
What do bits of the moon look like?
Yeah, well, they look remarkably like Apollo rocks. So some of them are very pale in colour, like this.
No?
Yeah, can't open the box.
Getting to hold a bit of the moon is still special. Yeah. So
Yeah.
it's sort of this grey colour, right?
Yes, so this is a bit from the lunar highlands. So when you look up to the moon at night, you can see a lot of it's very pale grey in colour. And that is because most of the surface is covered with this rock called anorthosite, which makes up the highlands of the moon. So that's a bit of the lunar anorthosite. And then we have other bits that look darker in colour.
Yeah, you can really, maybe I can hold them next to each other, you can
Yeah.
see the difference there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So the darker bits, many of those are basalts that form the dark splodges that you can see on the moon. So these are later, the seas, the morays, yes.
I mean, they're here in the museum partly because it's fun to have a bit of the moon. What do we learn about the history of the moon and the history of the solar system from meteorites like this?
Well, so we've learnt so much from the Apollo missions about the formation of the moon, but the Apollo missions only sampled a very tiny part of the lunar surface, whereas lunar meteorites come from the whole global surface of the moon, so they can tell us what the far side's like, what more polar regions might be like. So they give us a much kind of richer idea about the geological history of the moon.
What can we still learn from the moon about its formation, about the Earth, about the solar system?
So the Apollo rocks came back, and in some ways they're chemically similar, very similar to the Earth. In some ways they were different, so they didn't have so much water and other volatile materials in them. And the model that fits that best is an idea that something about the size of Mars smashed into the surface of Earth and scattered material off that went to form the Earth's moon. So Apollo has given us that really amazing kind of big picture knowledge of how the moon and the Earth formed as companions together in space. Most scientists do think that there was this big impact, but exactly how big the impactor was, what angle it hit the Earth at, what its composition was, are all things that we don't really know yet. And we could answer if we had more samples.
So if there's one question that you as a solar system geologist, as a planetary scientist, would like answered by missions to the moon, what would it be?
I would like to know more about why the far side of the moon is different to the near side of the moon. So the far side of the moon is such a place of mystery. We can't see it with our telescopes on Earth. And it would be great just to get a piece of that back in the lab to be able to do our research on it and learn more about that mysterious part of the moon.
And do you have any theories as to why it's different?
Well, so it has more of the highlands material, the pale-coloured material on the far side. That could be, and the crust seems to be thicker there, so that could be some kind of gravitational influence of the Earth, or it could be that there was more than one moon formed by the giant impacts, and then those hit into the far side of the moon and caused this asymmetry.
God, so another violent event somewhere in history.
Well, yeah.
Maybe.
I'm sure the geological history of the moon is much more complicated than we know at the moment. There's lots to discover.
As we anticipate the return of people to the moon, I'd like to introduce you to one of my favourite exhibits here in the Science Museum. This behind me is the J2 rocket motor. This played a critical role in getting people out of Earth's orbit. Without this fantastic piece of engineering, we would have never made it to the moon. And so the question comes up, where do we go next?
And before we go, there's still time to tell you about one new cosmic discovery, a new type of explosion called a micronova. Not as spectacular as a supernova, but still powerful enough to burn through what the Times reckoned was the equivalent of 3.5 billion pyramids of Giza, which I make is about 10 trillion giraffes.
Chris, not giraffes again. That's all we've got time for this month. But do join us for the next programme, where we'll be celebrating the 80th birthday of the Astronomer Royal.
Until then, enjoy the lunar eclipse and keep an eye out for exciting breaking news about black holes coming from the Event Horizon Telescope this Thursday. For now, from the Science Museum here in London, good night.
Enter a labyrinth of curiosity to find answers to questions that have mystified, perplexed and challenged. Simply listen to Inside Science, now on Sounds.